He was just standing in the center of an underground fight club, slowly taking off his jacket, the burly man across from him. The arrogance on his face vanished instantly. 1 second he was talking trash. The next, his expression changed. The man immediately turned to the referee and said he was forfeiting. He didn't want the money. He didn't want the fight. There was only one reason. He didn't want to die here. Just like that. Dalton didn't throw a single punch. He won the match, took the cash, and walked out. Outside the arena, a gambler who had lost money chased him down. The knife went straight into Dalton's body. But here's the strange part. Dalton didn't react at all. He just stood there. In that moment, the gambler realized something horrifying. He turned and ran. Dalton, as if nothing had happened, walked to the trunk of his car, pulled out some tape, and casually patched himself up. That's when a woman approached him. Her name was Frankie. She told him she owned a diner that kept getting harassed by local thugs. She needed someone who could keep the place under control. Salary, $20,000 a month. Dalton pulled the knife out of his body while listening, then turned her down without hesitation. He said he wasn't interested. Frankie saw how cold he was and didn't push it. She just left her contact info, hoping he'd reconsider. Dalton wasn't an ordinary man. He used to be the world heavyweight fighting champion. In one official match, after he had already won, he accidentally killed his opponent in the ring. Worse still, that opponent was his friend. That incident ended his career and drove him away from the sport entirely. Dalton parked his car on a railroad track. The train kept getting closer. He didn't move. At the very last second, he hit the gas and drove off. Maybe not. Wanting a different kind of life, Dalton eventually dialed that number. He went to Frankie's diner. The place was called Glass Island. It was a rough town. Fights were routine. The cops barely intervened. They'd hired security before, even former Marines. But no one lasted more than 2 days. That told you everything you needed to know. This place was truly out of control. And on Dalton's very first day on the job, trouble found him immediately. The people causing problems were members of the Brandt family. They'd been terrorizing the diner for months, smashing things, picking fights, scaring customers, acting like they owned the place. Then he walked up to the leader, a guy with a thin mustache, and calmly asked one question. "Can we take this outside?" The man didn't give him any respect. Dalton glanced toward the door and casually asked, "Those motorcycles outside, they yours?" The man nodded. "Mine's the red one on the right." That was it. They were all dragged outside. Once there, Dalton politely suggested they make sure they had health insurance, because what was coming next was going to be expensive. A few minutes later, broken bones, concussions, no one left standing. Out of basic principle, Dalton personally made sure every one of them got to the hospital. And while he was there, he had a doctor take care of his earlier wound too. From that day on, the name Brandt became permanently tied to Dalton. By the next morning, the whole town was talking. Dalton stopped by the bookstore and chatted with Charlie, the owner. Next door, at the grocery store, Brandt's people were causing trouble again. Charlie couldn't stand it. He went outside and told them to leave. When Dalton stepped out the door, the moment they saw him, they said nothing, just raised their hands and backed off. People like Charlie were rare on Glass Island. Before long, Brandt heard the news. His men reported that half their crew was still in the hospital and wouldn't be causing trouble anytime soon. Brandt was a rich kid with no real ability. His father was in prison. He desperately wanted to prove himself. The problem was, he didn't have a single capable man under him. For a while, there were still conflicts at the diner, but with Dalton's guidance, Billy and the others learned to handle things themselves. Dalton didn't even need to step in. Until one night, Will, who had just gotten out of the hospital, showed up. He caused trouble outside first, and was stopped by Dalton. Dalton wasn't seriously hurt, and returned to his boat. But inside the cabin, Will was waiting for him, with a gun. He talked while pointing the weapon, completely out of control. Dalton didn't argue. 2 quick moves, and Will was thrown into the water. Dalton didn't mean to kill him, but he forgot one thing. There were crocodiles in those waters. By the time Dalton realized it, it was too late. Will vanished beneath the surface. The next day, the police searched for the body. They found the boat. They found blood, but no trace of Will. That incident pushed the conflict between Dalton and Brandt to a whole new level. Dalton, meanwhile, acted like nothing had happened. Not long after, Brandt lost patience. Dalton had just left the bookstore when Brandt's men approached him again. One of them pulled out a gun, trying to intimidate him. Dalton looked at it and actually smiled. He explained calmly, "Just because a gun's in your waistband doesn't mean it's a real threat." Then he acted. A scream, fingers bent the wrong way. The man collapsed, the gun falling to the ground. Dalton told him that, if his boss wanted to meet, he'd be at the diner every night. After that, Dalton was clearly done playing nice. He confronted Frankie and asked what was really going on. why these people wouldn't leave the diner alone. At first, even Frankie didn't fully understand. She only knew the Brandt family was powerful, but the truth soon surfaced. The Brandts controlled most of Glass Island's underground business. They were planning a major development project, and the diner's land was right in the middle of it. If they couldn't buy it, they'd make life miserable. That's when Brandt's father called. Brandt glanced at the phone, didn't even dare answer, and tossed it into the sea. At the same time, a stranger arrived on the island. Tall, odd mannerisms. Definitely not a regular thug. His name was Knox. He'd been hired by Brandt's father, specifically to deal with Dalton. Dalton knew none of this. He was invited out by Ellie, a doctor, to clear his head. They rowed a speedboat out to open water, stopped on a sandbar, and drank a couple of beers. Afterward, Ellie dropped Dalton back on the island. Not long after, the police showed up at Ellie's place. The sheriff called Dalton out and chewed him out in public. The sheriff was Ellie's father. He also used to work for the Brandt family. On the surface, they ran tourism. Underneath, the real money was drugs. That confirmed Dalton's suspicions, and that's when he realized this was no longer just about bar fights. That night, Brandt personally came to the diner. In front of Dalton, he played an old video, footage of the match, where Dalton accidentally killed his opponent. Brandt wanted to provoke him. Dalton said nothing. After Brandt left, the real trouble began. Knox stormed into the diner with his crew. Cocky, brutal, and reckless. Within minutes, the place was chaos. Dalton stayed seated, unmoving, until Knox called out his name. Only then did Dalton stand up and walk toward him. Knox wasn't there to negotiate. He wanted to fight. Dalton held back, because he knew, once he lost control, there would be no turning back. After being publicly singled out, Dalton was thrown out of the diner. He hit the ground, stood back up. His expression had changed, but he still restrained himself. Back on his boat, Dalton packed his things. He was leaving Glass Island. That's when Frankie caught up with him. She finally confessed. She had known from the beginning why Brandt wanted the diner. That land was the most critical piece of the project. She hadn't been honest. Frankie thought Dalton was leaving because he'd been scared off. Dalton only said one thing. Yes, I am afraid. Then he grabbed his bag and walked away without looking back. At the station, he saw police cars everywhere. The news came quickly. The bookstore had been burned down. Brandt's people did it to force him out. The bookstore was reduced to ashes. Dalton looked at the ruins, then turned and left the station. His next stop, Brandt's villa. The arsonists were cleaning up, thinking it was over. One of them even joked that they'd finally scared Dalton away. He didn't finish the sentence. He was already dead. Dalton moved fast. No wasted motion. Bodies fell one by one. The last man broke completely, with one arm gone. He told Dalton everything. A deal was happening at dawn. Then he jumped on a motorcycle and fled. At dawn, a corrupt cop dragged a suitcase toward a boat. Dalton appeared behind him and knocked him out cold. The case was full of cash. Dalton sent the boat drifting away and fired several shots into a corpse in front of the other cops. It wouldn't frame anyone, but it would buy time. Then he knocked out the dirty cop with a baton, for good measure. Back on his boat, Dalton began assembling a bomb. That's when the sheriff arrived. He said Ellie had been kidnapped. The demand was simple. Hand over the money. Dalton didn't fully trust him, but he wouldn't risk Ellie's life. He sped toward Brandt's yacht. Inside the cabin, Brandt and the sheriff were sitting calmly on the couch. The truth came out fast. The kidnapping was a lie. The sheriff and Brandt were partners. Ellie had been taken, but not by the sheriff. They argued, blamed each other. No one backing down. Dalton lost patience. Then engines roared in the distance. Knox charged in on a speedboat. Dalton pulled out a remote. The explosion hit. The yacht erupted into chaos. Dalton knocked down anyone in his way and rushed deeper inside. Below deck, someone was already on fire. At the lowest level, Ellie was smashing a window, trying to escape. Dalton charged in. They were about to leave when gunshots rang out. Water burst through shattered glass. They swam out from beneath the yacht. Dalton held the pursuers underwater. While Ellie went to start the boat, Knox circled back, trying to ram Dalton at full speed. Dalton used the man in his hands to block the impact. Meanwhile, Ellie was dragged down from behind by Brandt. Brandt sped off. Dalton seized the moment and climbed onto Knox's boat. Now, he said, this is our ring. Brandt looked back, lost control, and turned around for a head-on collision. The boats slammed together. Dalton was thrown to the stern. Ellie and Brandt fought. Dalton grabbed Brandt's arm and kicked him across the deck. Brandt landed hard, critically injured, barely able to move. Knox resurfaced beneath the bridge, stole a car, and returned for one final fight. At last, Dalton and Knox faced each other. No escape, no retreat. Knox looked like a brute, but his strength, endurance, and technique matched a professional fighter. They took damage nonstop. No defense, only trading blows. When Dalton's weapon broke, his power dropped sharply, but he never let go. In the end, Knox fell. The sheriff arrived. Because his daughter had been saved, he let Dalton leave Glass Island immediately. He would handle the rest. The next day, Dalton boarded a bus to leave. Charlie came to say goodbye. Inside the bookstore ruins, Charlie's father found a suitcase. Inside, cash. By the time he ran outside, the bus was already gone. Dalton had left Glass Island.